from Los Angeles. This is the Special Report with Areva Martin.
When it comes to sexual desire, this is another misconception that we really have to work on changing. People assume that sexual desire is supposed to be the same throughout their life, throughout their relationship. There are different types of sexual desire. You have what we call spontaneous desire, and you have responsive desire. When we talk about spontaneous desire, that's the type of desire that people frequently experience at the beginning of a relationship, when everything is new, when everything is fresh. And that's when you're sitting in a meeting and you're like, oh my gosh, I can't wait to get home and have sex with my partner. Or, you're standing at the grocery store, and I give an example in the book, and you're walking through the grocery store and you're trying to get orange juice, and you're like, what would go good with this orange juice? Some sex. It's that kind of thing. You just want it. But then as your relationship grows and develops, and maybe you have kids and you're dealing with in-laws and all of these other things.
Stress of adulting.
Yes, exactly. You may still want sex, but it's in a different way. A lot of times those individuals will experience responsive desire, which is when you say, what would go good with my orange juice at the store? It's donuts. It's not necessarily sex. You're not walking around thinking about it all of the time. However, if you have a strong relationship with your partner and you're willing to allow your partner to arouse you, meaning doing those things like kissing and hugging and, all of those things that may arouse you, then once your arousal reaches a certain level, then the desire kicks in. So basically with spontaneous desire, you experience desire and then you look for your partner so that you can experience arousal. Whereas with responsive desire, you allow your partner to arouse you and then you experience desire. The problem is we've been programmed to believe that that spontaneous desire is the only type of desire that exists, and that spontaneous desire is the only type of desire that is normal. And that is not true. It is very, very, very common for women to switch between the two, depending on what's going on in life. And also it's very common for women to predominantly have a responsive desire kind of sex style as opposed to spontaneous desire. So a lot of times just explaining that to women and allowing them to know that they are healthy and normal when they experience spontaneous desire is what they really need to know, because they do experience that type of desire. It's just that they want to experience spontaneous desire all the time because they think that's the only type of desire that counts. They think that responsive desire is a second place prize, but that's not true. And research shows that responsive desire doesn't lead to better orgasms. So that has to count for something. Yeah.
Yeah. So is there an age limit, though, on responsive desire? Does a woman reach a certain age, say 70, 80, 90, where they no longer even have a responsive, arousal or desire to have sex?
Every person is going to be different as far as what they want. And I also want to point out, I'm talking about spontaneous desire and responsive desire, but it's also okay not to want sex at all. Mm-hmm. That's also okay. And that goes back to having the type of sex life that you want. Now, when it comes to spontaneous desire, responsive desire, and if someone doesn't have desire at all, then sometimes as people age, if they have certain medical conditions, sometimes, for instance, I'll go back to vaginal dryness just because that's a very common one. If someone has vaginal dryness, they may say, I don't experience responsive desire anymore. But the reason they don't experience responsive desire is because sex hurts. And not in a good way, like not in the way, like sex hurts. And because of that, it's not pleasurable to them. So if someone tries to arouse them, they're not going to reach that threshold to ignite the responsive desire. So in that case, it's about correcting that medical issue, the vaginal dryness, so that sex is pleasurable again for them and they won't be fearful of pain. Therefore, they can be aroused and then they can have that responsive desire ignited. But there's not an age cutoff saying, oh, once you're 85, forget it. you can forget it, girl. You're not ever gonna want sex anymore. Like, absolutely not. And I will tell you, Areva, I've been to like assisted living facilities and things where we had to examine people and they had sexually transmitted infections, and we had to have the talk with individuals who are older, because a lot of people, as they age, once they can't get pregnant, they don't want to wear condoms.
This book is pretty thick. So I just want to ask you, how did you decide what topics to include? It's rich with so much great information. And as an OBGYN has been practicing for, a while, I'm sure there's even more topics you could have included. So how did you narrow down the topics for the book?
I went with repeat offenders, the topics that kept popping up over and over and over in clinic, the topics that have a profound impact on a woman's health. Those are the ones I included.
Okay. And I know in each chapter, you also have a series of questions. Again, were these the questions that you get asked the most?
I went with those questions because certain questions have a higher probability of leading to answers that will allow you to improve your health overall. So those overall, like, that's the reason that I went with those questions. But you're correct. The questions that I chose are ones that I get frequently, but I also included questions that people don't tend to ask. However, when I provide these explanations, I see that a light bulb goes off. And they say, oh, that's what that means. That's why that happens. That's how I can fix it. And those were the things that I really wanted to focus on.
What are some of the common misconceptions that women have about their sexual health? Because again, as you said, we're taught early on that women shouldn't even talk, little girls, and then we grow up as women, shouldn't talk about sex. So I would imagine, consistent with that we're also taught some things about our sexual health that just aren't true. So what are some of those misconceptions?
Some of the misconceptions include, number one, the responsive versus spontaneous desire. We talked about that one. That's a huge one. Another one is that every pleasurable sexual experience requires an orgasm. Now, I'm not saying that you should run away from orgasms. You embrace them as they come to you. But when you talk to sex experts or you listen to reputable sex experts, a lot of them are encouraging people to focus on the whole sexual experience as opposed to just orgasms. And one of the best analogies I heard was about going to a restaurant. And the sex expert basically said, you know how if you go to a nice restaurant, you enjoy the whole experience. You walk in, you get bread, you get a meal, you eat your dessert, you walk out, you grab a mint, like all of those things. And all of that is considered the experience. Now, the dessert is great, but you can also have a pleasurable experience without the dessert. They equated sex to that analogy, and they basically said an orgasm is like the dessert, but you don't want to miss out on all of those other moments that happen during sex. And so that's important. And another thing is, when you put all the emphasis on orgasms, as women, a lot of times we'll fake it, because if you don't have an orgasm, people or the other person, your partner, just kind of has been trained to assume that the sex just didn't work out. It wasn't good sex. And so because of that, because we're caring human beings and we don't want to hurt our partner's feelings, we fake an orgasm. And that's unfortunate, because if you're in a healthy relationship, number one, your partner should want to please you. And if your partner wants to please you, but you're faking an orgasm, then why would they change what they're doing? Because they think that they're knocking it out of the park. Yeah. But also, if you're busy faking an orgasm, then you're taking power away from your partner, because you're not allowing them to then focus on the other pleasurable things that you are experiencing during, that you could experience during the encounter. So that's a couple of them. But we just have to change. We have to change our whole mentality. And I'll say one more thing as far as arousal. There are a lot of misconceptions about arousal, and your partner may not always say, oh, I noticed a lot of vaginal lubrication, so that means I know you're good to go. But vaginal lubrication doesn't always correspond to somebody's level of sexual arousal. And specifically, like in heterosexual relationships, if you have a man and a woman, the man may assume that arousal means, oh, you're good to go, but that's actually a physiologic response, and it doesn't necessarily mean that. So you really have to communicate.
Yeah, let's talk about orgasms. This is such a big topic, obviously, in the book and just in life. And you're right, there is this notion that if the sexual experience doesn't end in an orgasm, something's wrong with either person, right? Either the man didn't do his quote unquote job, or the man says there's something wrong with you, the woman. So how do we have that conversation with our partner when both, and again, we're talking heterosexual relationships now, when both come into that conversation with this notion that if I do what I'm supposed to do and you do what you're supposed to do, this orgasm thing is supposed to happen every time?
Why do we think an orgasm is supposed to happen every time?
That's what we've been taught, as people.
So how do we have to teach people something different? We have to have this conversation. And also, you have to realize that there's more to sex than an orgasm. Like, that's the whole conversation, right? A lot of women will have very satisfying sexual experiences because they enjoy the bonding that they experience with their partner during that. And we've been taught to put the orgasm on a pedestal when some women value that emotional connection as much as, or even more than, they value the orgasm. So you can't tell your partner what they should be valuing during a sexual encounter. And now, I'm not saying you shouldn't do things that's pleasing to your partner as long as you're willing to do those things. And I'm not saying that people should run away from orgasms. I'm just saying that we have to change our perception of what a quote unquote successful sexual session looks like. That's going to look different for different people. So you have to have a conversation with your partner so you can determine what they're trying to get out of the experience, and then you can move forward.
Well, given, Dr. Nita, that we know, men, the notion of an orgasm, or the notion that a man has the responsibility to please a woman in this sexual encounter is such a part of it's so pervasive in our culture. How does a woman have that conversation with a man who comes into the relationship with that notion that he has this burden, this responsibility? How do you get the man to see what you just said, that it is okay if you don't have an orgasm, man, heterosexual man, and it's okay if me, female, heterosexual female, if I don't have an orgasm? I feel like this book, a lot of women are going to read your book, and then we're going to understand that. But where's the counterpart for the man who's been told all his life that, to be a stud, that you've got to please your woman with this orgasm, you got to have her, screaming and, talking in tongues or whatever men think that they have to do, to be successful. It feels like that's a lot for us as a woman to try to, dissuade them from what they have been taught pretty much all of their lives too.
It's about communication. It's about communication. And you should know, you know your partner, and you know the types of conversations they may be amenable to. I think it's about how you approach the topic. Number one, it's about how you approach the topic. But also, if you're having a problem having that conversation with your partner and you're in a committed relationship, sometimes maybe counseling or therapy is the right way to go. If you're having a hard time having difficult, quote unquote, difficult conversations, or I should say conversations that you deem difficult, bringing in another person to help you navigate that situation can also be beneficial in some instances.
I'm glad you mentioned that, bringing in a third person, bringing in an expert, because I know you dedicate a whole chapter in the book to finding Dr. Right. Tell us, what is some of the things that people are going to learn by reading the book about finding that right person, whether it's somebody to talk about your sex life or some, health issue that you may be having.
When it comes to finding the right doctor, it's going to be really, really, really important that you do your homework. Your health is very valuable. And I tell people, just like you may not automatically click with other individuals and want to form a friendship with them outside of, the clinic or whatever, just walking around in everyday life, it may be the same thing when you go to the doctor. Like, some relationships work and some relationships just don't. And if you're in a relationship that's just not working for you, my first tip would be to make sure you are actively looking for another provider. Make sure you're actively looking for another healthcare clinician. And the way you can do that is, number one, ask your friends. Like, that's going to be my first tip. Ask your friends. Or even if you're watching this, if you have a doctor you love, send your friends a text right now and say, hey, don't know if anybody's looking for a doctor, but I see such and such and I absolutely love them. And if you happen to be looking for a doctor and someone tells you that they love their doctor, the next thing you're going to want to do is say why. Why do you love them? Do you love them because they listen to you, because they allow you to ask as many questions as you want to ask, or like, what makes you love them? And then you also want to ask what type of medicine they practice. And when I say that, I mean, some people are really into holistic healing. Some people are just like, take this pill and this is what I want you to do, or whatever. And if you're a person and you're into yoga and you're into acupuncture and you're really looking for a holistic approach, then you're not going to click with a doctor who just wants you to take a pill. So when you have that conversation with your friend, then ask them, how their doctor tends to lean. So that's going to be the other thing you want to do. And also, you can go on Google and look at the medical board websites and see if the doctor has any lawsuits or anything like that. Now, one or two may not necessarily mean that it's a big red flag, but if you see something that's recurring, then that's something that you would want to pay attention to. So those are some of the things that you can do to find a doctor. And I will also say telemedicine is also a big benefit, because if you're looking for someone and you don't have access to someone that you're clicking with close by, then maybe you can schedule an appointment with somebody on the other side of the country and just kind of get their opinion. And they may also know someone who is closer to you that they would recommend for you.
Well, and you did say go on the website or go on Google to find a doctor, not to diagnose ourselves, which many of us do. We go to Google and we become many doctors ourselves. We think we've, taken all the years that you have in practice in school, and then we start giving ourselves all kinds of conditions, which, people tend to do. But how do we know, Dr. Nita, if we need to go to see you, an OBGYN? You mentioned sex expert. How do we know what kind of doctor to see? Is there something you can tell us that would help us decide? Because I don't think I saw an OBGYN until I was pregnant with my first child. My daughters, though, I think the both of them, they transition from pediatrician and they go to one probably has been to an OBGYN, I think, and the other one still goes to like a primary care doctor. So it's a little confusing. Like, when do we need someone like you? Because you're considered a specialty, right? An OBGYN is a specialist. So if I have certain kind of health insurance, I wouldn't naturally be going to you originally, would I?
A lot of times, if you have a certain type of health insurance, then the insurance company may require a referral to an OBGYN, but that's not always going to be the case. However, I would say, when it comes to an OBGYN versus a primary care doctor, if you're just trying to go to one of those, I would ask them, I would say, do you think I need to, if I'm at a primary care doctor's office, I would say, do you think I also need to see a gynecologist? If I'm at a gynecologist's office, I would say, do you think I also need to see a primary care doctor? In some cases, an OBGYN may do all of the things that a primary care doctor will do. In some cases, a primary care doctor, for instance, a family practice doctor, may be willing to check your blood pressure, check you for diabetes, do your pap smear, do your breast exam. They may do all the things that a primary care doctor and an OBGYN would do. And so it's about having a conversation with your doctor and saying, hey, I'm seeing you, but do I need to see this other type of doctor as well?